Uh, I always thought I never focused on my patients who got better. I always focused on my patients that didn't get better and why. And it started with the gut, but the piece that I realized was the most important piece is the mental, emotional, spiritual part. And it's kind of funny that in functional medicine, we have this thing called the matrix that teaches practitioners how to practice functional medicine. And it's all this stuff we've talked about, toxins and mitochondria and cardiovascular health and diet. At the center of this matrix is mental, emotional, spiritual health.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reshape Your Health podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Morgan Nolte, and today I'm really excited for this conversation. We get to meet Dr. Peter Kozlowski, and he is a medical doctor specialized in functional medicine. So he has a couple of books. The first is Unfunc Your Gut, and then the most recent one that we're going to be referring to a lot today is called Get the Func Out, which I thought was a really cute and creative name. He does work with patients virtually and in person. He has 2 clinics, one in Chicago, one in Bozeman, which is kind of on my bucket list of places to visit. So I'm so excited for this conversation. We're going to start with heavy metals, which is not something that we've done in depth on the podcast before, and then dive into thyroid. So Hashimotos, low thyroid. A lot of people in our audience struggle with low thyroid levels, and we're going to have a really detailed conversation on why and what you can do about it to improve your thyroid health, because it's so important for so many different things. We're going to touch on osteoporosis a little bit today and how heavy metals can impact that and blood pressure, and also talk about adrenals. So it's going to be a conversation that hopefully resonates, at least in part, with anyone who's listening to this. And again, really quick, if you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, do it right now. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, share this with a friend. I know it's going to be a really good one. So can I call you Dr. Peter? What do you like me to call you there?
Whatever you want, Dr. Peter, Dr. Koz. That's what a lot of people call me because they can't pronounce my last name the way you could. So whatever you want.
Okay, well, we'll see how it goes. I like Dr. Koz. I think that's kind of catchy.
Thanks.
So can you just introduce yourself and
Sure.
tell us where you're from? Tell us how you got into functional medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a first generation American. My parents are immigrants from Poland. My parents were both doctors in Poland. And there's a number of doctors in my family, but they never really pushed me. I was interested in it. And my main problem when I was young is I didn't really like to study. I was more of like a partier. And so I went into college as a pre-med, and pretty sad, but classes for pre-med were Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Thursdays were the big night to go out. So I was missing my class on Fridays a lot. All my friends were business majors. And so I switched to a business degree for my lifestyle. And so needless to say, my priorities were not intact. And so I got my business degree, did well. And during my senior year of college, my best friend, Michelle, she came back from spring break with a rash and feeling unwell. And it spiraled very quickly. She was diagnosed with lupus and passed away 2 months later, 1 week after we graduated college. And so I'm a helper. I like to help people. And I felt totally helpless in the situation. I was like borrowing books, medical books from my mom, and like trying to read about it, and couldn't do anything. So that I didn't really know what I want to do with my life with my business degree anyway. And so I thought about medicine at that point. I had to go back to school, get a post-bachelorate, take the MCATs, go to medical school. And so I did all of that. And I would say that those are the 2 main reasons I got into medicine. If you would have asked me when I started medical school, when I started residency, if you would have told me I'd go into functional medicine, I would have laughed in your face. No way. Like, I was your prototypical doctor that knew it all and was the god of the world and could be told nothing. A lot of ego. So, but that brings it together that I never really let go of that party lifestyle. I was very much a work hard, play hard. And so I was a binge drinker. And when I started residency, I tried to stop, and I had no idea how to deal with life. I had like the emotional attitude of like a 12-year-old. And so I went to treatment for alcohol. And during residency, I took a 6-week break, and I didn't even think I had an alcohol problem because I did it like on my own free time, but I did, and I do. And so that experience changed my life, obviously. My treatment had nothing to do with alcohol. It was all about why. So I was introduced to this concept of underlying causes. And in treatment, we were doing lots of group therapy. We were doing acupuncture and yoga and meditation and all these things that I thought were full of crap. But I saw them working in my own life. So I went back to residency. We had a doctor who worked with us. His name's Dr. Batra. As a resident, you get trained by different physicians. So you work with somebody different every day, every week. And so you're learning different styles of how to practice medicine. And as residents, for family practice, which is what I did my residency in, you do a lot of inpatient hospital care. So you're treating people that are admitted to the hospital. And every week we would have a different attending, and all of them had their own different style. Well, every time Dr. Batra came on our service, he would have us start every patient that was admitted on vitamin D and a multivitamin. And we thought it was a joke. We like made fun of it. And one day when I was, the new me, or on my way to being the new me, I was with him overnight in the hospital. And I just kind of asked him, I was like, Dr. Batra, like, why are you weird? Like, what are you doing? Why do we do this? Yeah. And so he's like, I'm studying functional medicine. And he took me on the website. I was like, that looks cool. They, as a resident, you're like required to take time to go for CME. It's called continuing medical education, and they pay for it. And I didn't know what else I wanted to get my continuing medical education in. So I was like, I'll try this. The conference was in LA. So I was like, it'll be warm. Within the first hour, so it's a week-long conference, lots and lots of doctors and practitioners from all types of fields. Within the first hour of the first conference, I was kind of looking around and being like, looking around like, why has nobody taught me this yet? And so the first actually talk was about the thyroid. I believe we started with the thyroid, and they started talking about nutrients for the thyroid. And I was like, what? Like, I thought all we do is like give Synthroid. And I thought all we do is test TSH. And so I was like learning all these new lab tests to order and all this stuff. And then at the conference, I was talking to a lot of the doctors there who were surgeons and neurologists and all the like cardiovascular. And I was like, what are you guys doing here? Like, why are you here? And everybody was telling me like, this is the future of medicine. This, if you're just getting started, because I was still an intern. So I don't think I was the youngest person, but I was definitely like the youngest in my career at that point. Now I've seen like medical students, even at functional medicine conferences. But they were all telling me like, you should do this. This is it. And with my friend Michelle having lupus, like that, the idea of like the underlying cause, that definitely was my goal when I started out in medicine, is to help people with stuff like that. And so functional medicine was the perfect place for me to end up. And the other really cool things that happened to me is that my residency program was extremely supportive. They, when I came back and told my program director that I wanted to do this functional medicine, he had never heard of it, but he was like, if this is what you're interested in, go for it. So they allowed me to do away rotation. So I actually left my program for weeks at a time. And that's when I went and spent time at Dr. Mark Hyman's clinic and Dr. Susan Blum's clinic and Dr. Deepak Chopra's clinic in Carlsbad. And so I was getting to actually see how functional medicine was applied, because it is so different than what I was being taught, the lab testing, the approach, all of it. And you come out of a conference like that, any practitioner that's been to an IFM conference, it's like, you don't even know where to start on Monday morning when you get to work. And so that kind of helped me start to put it together. And when I was at these clinics, I shadowed everybody. I shadowed nutritionists, I shadowed the receptionist, I shadowed life coaches, the doctors, the PAs, the nurses, the janitors. Like I was just I had these big yellow legal pads, and I was just writing from morning to night every day, everything that I was hearing, because it was all so different. And then when I finished residency, I went off to practice on my own. It'll be 9 years soon that I've been practicing on my own. And that's my story, I guess. I can gladly say I've helped many, many people with autoimmune diseases, put them into remission, which is something that from a regular medical perspective, you would tell someone there's no chance you're going to live with this forever. So mission accomplished. And once I really built up a lot of good stories, one of my life goals was to write a book. And so I wrote Unfunc Your Gut, which is about nutrition, gut health, and mental, emotional, spiritual health. And for me, my approach to functional medicine, I kind of described there's 5 main areas that I look, and they are nutrition, gut health, mental, emotional, spiritual health. And the last 2 are hormones and toxins. So my book that just came out not too long ago, Get the Func Out, it is about hormones and toxins. So to me, I've put out there what I wanted to put out there in regards to what functional medicine is and how to practice it, and taking what I learned from, people that created this field basically, and then applying my own style, I guess, to it. At my practice, we had a saying that we put the Func in functional medicine. So both of my books are spelled Func with a C, F-U-N-C. That's where it comes from. If anybody's having a hard time finding it, you might be spelling it wrong. And yeah, so that's my story.
That's great. What are the main complaints of people that become your patients? I'm sure they've been to other doctors. What are their main complaints? Like, who do you help really well?
For sure, gut issues, IBS. So many people have been diagnosed with that, and it's probably my least favorite diagnosis in the medical world, besides maybe like fibromyalgia. IBS is way more commonly diagnosed, so I guess that's why I dislike it a little more. And it's basically, those are diagnoses in the regular medical world that are like, we've run our tests, we have no clue what's wrong with you, so take an antidepressant. And that's not ever the underlying cause of IBS, is a deficiency in an antidepressant.
Yeah.
So for sure, gut issues, but I have had probably the one condition, which is shocking to even say out loud, that my success rate has been 100%, is with autistic children.
Really?
Yeah. Which is a miracle, I think, really. And it's a spectrum, though, just like autism is a spectrum. Not everybody gets all the way better, but it's something that if the families are able to follow through, there's always an improvement. So I really actually enjoy working with them. Some of my coolest stories is just having kids that were in my office banging their heads into my desk, not looking at me. And now they're in like regular classes and having full conversations with their parents. Hashimotos for autoimmune disease, lupus, a lot of the inflammatory bowel diseases, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, osteoporosis, high blood pressure, dementia, diabetes. So I work with everything. Skin is a huge one, because I always say your skin is the best representation of your gut. So we've had tremendous success with things like eczema or rashes and things like that. So a little bit of everything. I guess probably the only thing that I don't really work with is like cancer. I never specialized in that, so that's outside of my comfort zone. But yeah, other than that, pretty much all ages from babies to elderly.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I wanted to ask you why you said offline that if you had one test to order, I mean, obviously you work with a very broad demographic, but if you had one test to order, it would be a heavy metals test.
Yeah.
So why is that? Because that was surprising to me.
Yeah, kind of crazy, right?
Yeah.
So the whole the focus of my new book is on hormones and toxins and environmental toxins. So when I say toxins, I am talking about things like heavy metals like lead and mercury. I am talking about mold. I am talking about glyphosate, which comes from Roundup. I am talking about the junk that they put in your makeup and your mascara and your hair straightening products. Talking about cell phones and Wi-Fi. All of these things are extremely prevalent in our environment, right? And we have made our environment increasingly more toxic every year. And this is probably, let's say 50 years where it really accelerated. And so we're seeing a skyrocketing in all those conditions that I mentioned, right? Like the rate in autism in the 80s was like 1 in thousands, and now it's 1 in 40, and it's down to 1 in 32 now, I think. And Hashimotos, right? Like everybody pretty much knows someone who's taking medicine for their thyroid, right? Estrogen dominance, low testosterone. Like I was diagnosed with low T at the age of 32. That's not normal. So I diagnose a lot of these hormonal imbalances, but my patients want me to take it even a step further, and they want to know why. The whole point of functional medicine is why. Like, okay, great, I have Hashimoto's. Why did it happen? I have high blood pressure. Why did it happen? And so when someone comes to me, I always warn them, I'm like, I'm not going to give you anything to feel better tomorrow. Like if you're expecting, for your joint pain to go away tomorrow, it's not going to happen most likely. What we're doing is identifying imbalances in the body and then rebalancing them. And then through rebalancing them, people get better. Now, my argument in the book and what I've seen over the years is that the main reason our hormones are so imbalanced is because of our toxic environment. So one of the analogies I really like to use is that we're all born with a bucket. And we kind of talked about the bucket picture in the book. And we fill that bucket with stress, with sugar, with high unhealthy fats, with fast food, with the lead that's in the air that we breathe, the mercury that's in the fish that we eat, the glyphosate that's in the clothes that we wear. Just 2 days ago, I was reading an article that there was a study that came out of New Zealand, and they found massive amounts of microplastics in the rain. So just when it's raining down plastic on us. And I forget, but it was like the equivalent of a shocking amount of plastic that's coming down in the rain. So it does not matter, unfortunately, kind of like what we're doing, we're being exposed to all these different toxins. And the one thing that they never really did is study how these toxins would affect us. And since they started introducing them, there's a correlation with the amount of chronic disease that is skyrocketing. And so that when people are asking me the why, I think that that's a major reason why is our bodies weren't designed to be, rained on with plastic. We weren't designed to, drink everything out of plastic bottles. These are foreign substances that they can get into our body. And any of these toxins that we're mentioning are fat soluble. And so whether we talk about lead or glyphosate or mold, they are fat soluble. And when these toxins, when it rains on us, when we breathe them, when we eat them, drink them, we have barriers to keep them out. And that's our skin, our lungs, and our gut. Those are all entryways where these things try to get in. And if we're healthy, we're sleeping, we're eating well, our gut's balanced, then we're going to keep most of them out, ideally. But we're being exposed to so much that we can't keep up, right? So some of these toxins start getting into our body. And since they are fat soluble, every cell in your body is surrounded with a membrane that has fat in it. So these toxins can get stored all over your body. And we never really studied how that would affect us, right? And so when they do start getting stored, that's what starts filling up our bucket. And eventually that bucket overflows into disease. right? And I think probably the scariest part about the toxins, maybe, I don't know, there's a number of things, but you don't taste them, you don't feel them, they don't cause symptoms. So you could be living in a moldy house for 10 years and not have symptoms from it. And what it is that they're filling your bucket, and then you go to your doctor and you're diagnosed with Hashimotos or low T like me, or, whatever condition you want to pick. And at that point, we're trying to reverse what's happening. And we're then trying to identify what's in your bucket and get rid of it so then your body can start healing. The organ that I did not mention is the liver. And most people, when they think of detox, that's your detox organ, right? Well, to take it a step further, when these toxins get through our gut, get through our skin, get through our lungs, we're very fortunate because the first place our body sends them for filtration is the liver. And the liver goes through what is called phase 1 and phase 2 of detox, and it makes those toxins water soluble. Once they're water soluble, you poop, pee, and sweat them out. That's what detox is taking these toxins that are fat soluble, making them water soluble, and then we get rid of them. You need nutrition for phase 1 and phase 2 of detox. So you need micronutrients, you need antioxidants, you need vitamins, and I have tables in the chapter about detox of what nutrients you need for phase 1, what nutrients you need for phase 2, what foods are high in those nutrients. So all that info is there for people. So one of the ways that we can screw up our detox is by just having a poor diet and not getting enough nutrition, and then we're not supporting our liver. The other way is that we are being exposed to way more than we used to be. And so our livers can't keep up. And that's what's happened over time, is that the amount of this stuff that we're eating, breathing, drinking is increasing. And so our bodies are getting overwhelmed. And let's say my capacity of detox is 100 toxins. My liver can handle 100 a day. In an average day, I'm exposed to 50, I'm fine. But then on the weekend, I'm binge drinking and I'm eating processed foods and drinking out of plastic bottles, and I'm living in a moldy place, and I'm exposed to 1,000. 900 are going to get built up. And eventually they will cause disease. Now, the most common toxin, getting back to your question, that I find in people is heavy metals. And it is something that I've seen over the years. I don't need to hear anything in your history that tells me you have exposure to heavy metals. Being alive in 2022 or 3 is enough of a risk for being exposed to heavy metals because they are everywhere. Our exposure starts before we're even born. So heavy metals or any other toxin cross the placenta. They've done studies on umbilical cord blood and found hundreds of toxins in the umbilical cord blood. So we are born with a baseline. That's why when women come to me for pre-pregnancy planning, the first thing that I do is heavy metal testing along with other toxins. So I have an entire chapter on heavy metals, and that's why I would test anybody, is because so mercury is in fish, it's in dental fillings, it's in vaccines, it's in the exhaust from coal burning plants. That exhaust drops and settles onto our crops, so it's in our fruits and vegetables. Lead is in the airplane exhaust. The highest levels I've ever seen were in a mechanic from O'Hare Airport. A normal lead should be less than 1. My own level was 11, which I think contributed to my testosterone issue. This patient, who's a mechanic at O'Hare, his level was over 140. I've still never seen anything even close to that. So it's also older buildings, older cities. They made pipes out of lead. They used to put lead in paint. It's in there's like the cans we eat out of. A couple of years ago, there was a study on organic Gerber baby food, and they found like 200 times the amount of mercury in organic Gerber baby food. And that was like 2020. So you imagine what it was like 10, 20, 30 years ago. So we can't, unfortunately, we really don't avoid this stuff. And so with something like mold, which is the second most common toxin that I work with, I want to hear that you've been exposed. I usually don't test everybody because it can be very low yield if you don't have any mold exposure. We can get into that if we have time. But glyphosate is one. So glyphosate is the main component of Roundup. That's another one that was in the national news a few weeks back, and they said that they found glyphosate in over 80% of urine samples. I find it in over 90. Over 95, honestly, maybe even 99. And that's even in patients that have been eating organic for years. So those are some of the main ones I see. This book is about the connection to hormones. So one of their favorite places, the heavy metals or any other toxin to accumulate, is in your thyroid, in your adrenals, in your pancreas, in your testes, in your ovaries. That article about New Zealand and the plastic, they said one of the highest concentrations they found of those microplastic were in the testes, which would be the same ovaries for women. So they like to accumulate in our endocrine glands, which are hormone glands. But the three main systems that I clues me in to look at toxins are any kind of immune issues. So any kind of autoimmune disease, I'm going to look at toxins. Nervous system, any autism, dementia, everything in between. The reproductive system, which is the hormones. And then the cardiovascular system, because they accumulate all over our body. And once they start digging into the fat in our cell membranes, they start causing cell death. They create basically like a toxicity or acidity to your cells, which damages the mitochondria. Mitochondria are how we make energy. They keep the cell alive. When the mitochondria die, the cell dies. And so then if a cell that should be contributing to making thyroid dies, then you're going to make less thyroid, right? I think this whole concept for me started from Dr. Susan Blum, who is in New York. She is a phenomenal functional medicine doctor, was doing it for many, many years before I started. So I really learned a lot from her. She's a Hashimoto's patient, and she wrote an excellent book on Hashimoto's many years ago. I think it's one of the best functional medicine books, besides my own, of course. But she described to me the thyroid as a sponge. It is as a sponge for all of these things that we're being exposed to. And so for me, I like to make sense of things, right? So let's say these toxins like lead and mercury and mold and glyphosate and plastics are accumulating in your thyroid. Well, Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease of your thyroid. That means your immune system has identified your thyroid as an invader, and it wants to get rid of it because it sees it as an invader. Your immune system's job in general is to protect you. It decides what is good and what is bad. And so if there's a virus, bacteria, toxin, or whatever, it'll attack it. Well, from a traditional medicine standpoint, if you were to ask your regular family practice doctor, or even your endocrinologist, why do I have Hashimoto's? How did it happen? Why is my body attacking my thyroid? They'll tell you, I have no clue, but here's Synthroid and come back in a year. Wouldn't it make sense that if your thyroid was absorbing all these toxins, that your immune system is actually kind of making an appropriate response, like, hey, get out of here, right? It doesn't feel appropriate because then your thyroid stops working and you feel really poorly. But I could argue that it's actually like an appropriate response. Just like food sensitivities, which is something I get into in the first book. We've completely changed our food supply. The hybridization of wheat, the genetic modification of soy and corn. So people's immune systems are responding, and there's gluten sensitivities and soy sensitivities and corn and a bunch of other foods. But these foods look different than they used to. So doesn't it kind of make sense that your body's actually making a pretty appropriate response by trying to get rid of them? So that is, I guess, just getting deeper into, why people should be curious about heavy metals, or any other toxin. If you're trying to figure out why you got sick, it's a great place to look, because you won't really feel it. Like, there's not a symptom like, oh, you have a runny nose, so you definitely have mercury or whatever. Like, they create inflammation all over the body. And I could take 100 patients that I'm treating for mold or heavy metals, and every one of them has a different symptom or a different combination of symptoms. I also believe that many people will live and die full lives, full of toxins, and never get sick. And so oftentimes people ask, well, why? Why would that happen? And that, my analogy with that is going back to the bucket. Some of us are very lucky and we're born with a huge bucket. Some of us are unlucky and born with a very small bucket. And another important point is traditional medicine does not accept this topic, really. So it's not really a good idea to go into your traditional rheumatologist or family practice doctor and be like, hey, I want a heavy metal test. They're going to look at you like you're crazy. You're really going to have to find someone in the alternative medicine world, because they believe in poisoning. They believe in like an acute toxicity. For example, the kids in Flint, Michigan, where they changed their water supply, there was tons of lead and they had acute neurologic symptoms. The concept that we talk about in functional medicine that regular medicine hates is total toxic body burden. That is the lifetime accumulation of all these different toxins. Basically, how full is your bucket? And I could take someone with a lead level of 10 and they have autoimmune disease. I could take someone with a lead level of 75 and they're totally fine. And that kind of, I think, breaks the thinking for a traditional medicine doctor. Like, well, if the higher it is, the worse it has to be. No, there's your gut health that plays a role. There's how much you're sleeping. There's how much you're exercising and sweating, and your relationships and the trauma you've been through. All of that, all of it is connected. And so be careful, I guess, if you're listening and want to go to your regular doctor and ask them for heavy metal testing. Probably not going to happen. Even within the functional medicine world. So for anybody looking for someone, I always recommend ifm.org. That's the Institute of Functional Medicine website. And you can search for a practitioner on there by your zip code or town and however distance you want. But not everybody that does functional medicine is comfortable with detox, just like they're not comfortable with the gut. And so I would always just check, like, hey, do you have experience doing heavy metal testing? And is it something that we can do? Because even for me, when I started my career, I avoided the whole environmental medicine world, which is the toxin world. I feel like I was so trained in medical school and residency to not believe in it, that it's a hoax, that it's not real, that I was really scared to get into it. But I wasn't getting as far as I wanted to with my patients with just working with nutrition, gut, toxins, mental, emotional, spiritual health. I knew there was more. And so that's when I started training deeper. And actually, I studied with someone named Dr. Lisa Naj, who's very known in the environmental medicine world. She has a clinic in Martha's Vineyard. So I actually spent some time with her too, and really kind of saw how environmental medicine is applied, which is a branch of functional medicine. So
that's interesting. As you were speaking there, I was feeling a little defeated because it's inevitable. I mean, we come into this world with heavy metals. We leave this world with heavy metals. My husband's a farmer, so glyphosate is in his environment for sure. And we're going to be moving to the farm next summer. So what can I do as a farmer's wife to protect my family from the glyphosate and from probably heavy metals in our water from 100-year-old pipes?
Yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's kind of terrifying, but some of the higher toxin issues that I've seen over the years are in people living on farms, which sucks for you and your family. But it also sucks for the rest of us because the farmers are the people that are giving us what we eat. And so if they're the most toxic, then besides like automotive and mechanics, that's another one. But so I always like to keep things simple. And so at the most basic level, you have to drink enough water, you have to pee. So drinking half your body weight in ounces. So if you're 160 pounds, 80 ounces of water a day. Making sure you're moving your bowels every day. So making sure you poop every day. The stool is, once we detox a toxin in the liver, we excrete some of it into the intestine. And so the only way to get rid of it then is to poop it out. If you haven't pooped for 3 days, then those toxins are just sitting there and they could get reabsorbed, right? So unfunking your gut is another massive step that people would overlook in detox. And the other one is sweating, which through exercise, but I really love infrared sauna. I specifically use infrared sauna mostly for mold detox, but I could argue it's valuable for any kind of toxin. And it's not just because it makes you sweat, but because it also, the infrared waves kind of help kill off some of the toxins in your body. So infrared sauna is something that can be done every day if you tolerate it. And sometimes people can't, so you got to go slow and work with someone to kind of get you going. But so those are 3 things that everybody should be doing: peeing, pooping, sweating, and sleeping. Because when we sleep, we basically restore. The way I look at it is the entire day from the time we get up is a constant onslaught of toxins. And in the introduction of my book, I go through my wife's daily routine. And just from like going to bed, getting up, making breakfast, getting ready, like with makeup and that stuff, and then playing with our dogs. The amount of toxins she's exposed to, like it for some people that haven't gone down this road, it can be kind of shocking. Like everything you're touching or doing can be considered a toxin. Like memory foam mattresses. I cite some studies that they found like over 80 different chemicals in memory foam mattresses. And I'll never forget, I ordered one, and then the day after it arrived, I went to a conference on environmental medicine and they started talking about it. Anybody that's ordered one, like you can get one off Amazon that comes in like this tiny box. And you're like, how is this a mattress? And then you start cutting it open and it just starts expanding, and 80 plus chemicals. So, and then testing, I would test the water. I really like the company called National Testing Lab. Their website is called watercheck.com. You can order up to hundreds of chemicals, medications that are in your water. It's pretty amazing. I would test homes for mold before moving in there. The doctor that trained me, Lisa Naj, she was an avid horse person. There's a lot of mold with horses, like with the hay. So most people that have grown up with horses test positive for mold. Something you wouldn't think about. And then testing the water, the air, and then you could start cleaning stuff up. So one of my favorite free resources for people is ewg.org. That's the Environmental Working Group. Many people are familiar with the Dirty Dozen, which are the 12 fruits and vegetables that are the most toxic, with herbicides, pesticides, all of that. Most people don't know that EWG is the group that's putting that info out. They update it every year. But you can go on ewg.org and start looking at everything in your house, all your different makeup products, your deodorant, your cleaning products, your laundry detergent. You can type in anything on there and you'll get a toxicity rating. So you can go through and start cleaning up your house. In the last chapter of Get the Func Out, I go through just a lot of stuff like how to look at your cookware, how to look at the cups you're drinking out of, all of this little stuff how to make your own like herbicides or pesticides for smaller gardens. So I try to help with that. But one thing I definitely don't want anybody to do is just assume that you're toxic. And it really, you should get tested. Pre and post chelation testing for heavy metals, urine testing for mycotoxins, urine testing for glyphosate. And then there's this urine panel that looks at all the other stuff. So the herbicides, the pesticides, the plastics, the chemicals from dry cleaning. Our furniture, they cover it in flame retardants. So if your house is burning, I find organophosphate flame retardants in people all the time, and that's just from your couch. So I would test this stuff, because there's one thing I hate about the world of detox from the functional medicine standpoint is the internet and social media. There's a lot of doctors selling detox products. Like, here, I've created this detox plan, order this $300 worth of supplements for 30 days, and then switch to phase 2, and then $500. And then when you're done with phase 2, it's phase 3 for another 1,000. And this is going to detox you from heavy metals, mold, glyphosate, all of it. I have different detox strategies for each different toxin. So that's a pet peeve of mine, because I have people come in and they're like, well, I've been following this social media doctor and I definitely have mold. And for me, the more that someone comes in and convinced that they have mold or heavy metals or whatever, the more likely they are to test positive for something else. And so there's just a lot of marketing out there, a lot of people trying to make money off of this. And just be careful with that. I really don't like the 30-day cleanse detox. Like, as someone, and a lot of people don't have access to the testing. I've been very fortunate to have access to the testing. There are doctors out there that have it. So I think that that's a better route to go down, is to test your body and then treat it appropriately.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Esther Blum who was on the podcast, and she said, test, don't guess. I think a lot of functional medicine doctors really advocate the test, don't guess paradigm. So I appreciate those tips. We're going to be linking up like the ifm.org, watercheck.com, ewg.org. We'll link those up in the show notes. Really quick, what cookware do you use? Because that's something that I'm actively thinking about, like, updating. That's kind of one of the next things on my list. So what do you recommend personally?
So I've been using like stainless steel most recently, but they're hard. I mean, the problem with the cookware is I guess the safer it is, the more they stick and burn. So it's really kind of difficult to get. Either way, like, if you get something that's nonstick, then you're getting chemicals from it. If you get something that doesn't have that nonstick, then it's going to be sticking. So it's difficult, really, for me. I haven't actually found my favorite one yet, honestly.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I know I've kind of updated my makeup, and like the deodorant I still need to do, and our, different like soaps and detergents I still need to do. But I think I love the notion of like, it's a lifestyle and it's a journey, and you don't have to make all these changes overnight.
No.
Even like updating the type of gum that I'm chewing, so it doesn't have artificial coloring in it.
Right.
Like, that's one, and it doesn't have aspartame in it. So I think even those little things are good. Before we move on from the heavy metals, I wanted you to tie them to osteoporosis, because that's something you thought my audience might appreciate. Can you go ahead and do that before we talk a little bit more in depth on the thyroid and adrenals?
So definitely something that is common, people coming into me that have either been diagnosed with osteopenia, osteoporosis, and ideally they come in for prevention, which is rare. Most people don't come to me until the disease has already started, and then we're trying to reverse it. But if somebody comes to me for osteoporosis or prevention, the first place I like to look is heavy metals, because the lead and the mercury can get stored in your bones. And the same mechanism is that you have cells in your bones that create more bone growth, and then you have cells that kind of cause bone resorption. If those cells are full of toxins, they're not functioning properly, right? And then you throw in on top of it, you haven't been eating, you haven't been getting your nutrition, or you're not digesting and your gut's imbalanced. And so then you don't have the nutrients for your bones. And then instead of getting nutrients, they're loading up with heavy metals. It's no wonder that they can decay or become weaker. So I really love to get the heavy metals out, and if they're there. So that is one of the top conditions that if somebody comes to me for prevention, just like dementia prevention, first place I'll look is heavy metals, or like I said, pre-pregnancy planning. And so by getting that stuff out, then you can then reload your bones with nutrients, and they'll actually have a place to get stored and function because you've gotten the toxins out, and then your bones can heal or just not become weak and osteoporotic. So again, these, when we talk about heavy metals or these other toxins, the book is about hormones, but they get stored everywhere. In the heavy metal chapter, I talk of a story of a patient that came to me on 3 blood pressure pills. And that's usually kind of the max, where the cardiologists are like, well, we're out of options. So if you're on 3, you're kind of then screwed. And so he was like, I'm out of options. What can we do? I was like, let's look at your metals. We found a lot of lead in him. It took us over a year to get it out. By the time that we were done, he was off all 3 meds. And he never told his cardiologist, and his cardiologist was so proud and happy, but didn't really know what we were doing. So osteoporosis for sure, because they like to accumulate in our bones, and you won't feel it, you won't know it. It'll just be like, well, you go for your DEXA scan that your doctor recommended, and they're like, you have osteoporosis, or you fall and you fracture, and it's like, well, now we looked at your bones and they're actually really weak. Well, one of the ways you could have at least helped prevent the weakness is by getting the toxins out, specifically the heavy metals.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And then I like how you explained really clearly what happens when they accumulate in the thyroid. So if we can pivot and talk a little bit more about Hashimoto's, can this be reversed? Can Hashimoto's be reversed, and how can it be reversed?
To me, the answer is yes, but it is difficult. I can't tell you how many people have come to me over the years and told me they've been on thyroid medication for 30 years. And I always start every visit with, what are your goals or expectations? And they're on 200 micrograms of Synthroid or 160 milligrams or whatever of Armor thyroid. And they're like, well, I want to be off of my Armor by the end of the year. And that's difficult, is the honest answer. Susan Blum, in her book, she kind of talks, she was able to get her dose decreased by detoxing, right? So the goal is always to reverse it. Specifically with Hashimoto's, the difference between low thyroid and Hashimoto's is antibodies. And so what that means is there's a lot of people that are diagnosed low thyroid, but it's not an autoimmune attack. Like their thyroid is just low. When there's an actual autoimmune attack, your body will create what are called either TPO antibodies or anti-thyroglobulin antibodies. Simple blood test that should be done routinely, I think, if you have a low thyroid, which many doctors refuse to order. So to get diagnosed specifically with Hashimoto's, you have to have a low thyroid and you have to have antibodies. What a very realistic outcome is a significant decrease in those antibodies. In the first, after the introduction, the first chapter in Get the Func Out is on the thyroid. And I love patient stories. And I had a patient who, when she came to me, her antibodies, her TPOs were over 3,000. Which to get diagnosed with Hashimoto, like with antibodies, it could be like as low as like 12. So she was over 3,000, and the lab stops counting. So they'll just do greater than 3,000. And that's still the only time I've ever seen it. She had been exposed to the nuclear radiation from Chernobyl when she was young. And so there's lots of studies out there about the amount of thyroid disease from Chernobyl. Well, that was a toxin into our environment, right? And so I go through everything we did with her. I go through what her labs looked like on the first day of the visit, 6 weeks later, 1 year later, et cetera. So we were able in basically like 3 months to get her antibodies from over 3,000 to under 100. And so that's through the multifaceted approach, which is to look at nutrition, to look at gut health, to look at toxins, to look at mental, emotional, spiritual health, which is the number one thing that stops your body from converting T4 to T3. So it's not just one thing that we're doing. If I had to pick one thing, then I would pick toxins, but I like to look at a little bit of all of it, right? And so what's interesting is that a lot of people, when they think they have low thyroid or they talk to their doctor about low thyroid, the only test that your doctor will order is TSH, and which is to me the most useless number in a thyroid panel. I love analogies. So the way I describe your thyroid is like the heat in your house, and your brain is the thermostat, and that's your pituitary gland. Your thyroid is the heater. Well, in my house or office, I set the temperature to 68. When the thermostat detects the temperature drops below that, it sends a signal to the heater to turn it on to make heat, right? Well, TSH is that signal from your pituitary gland, which is your thermostat. So regular medicine, what they're doing is testing TSH. And if your TSH is high, they will say you have a low thyroid because there's a lot of signal coming from the brain. Totally not reliable in my experience. How many people I've seen over the years that are like, I have constipation, I have fatigue, I have low energy, my hair is falling out, my skin is dry. And I keep going. And every time I read online, it says I have a low thyroid. I go to my doctor, they test my TSH and they tell me it's fine. Or people that have been through the ER or through their regular doctor that have a high TSH and they right away get put on thyroid medicine. I test T4 and T3. T4 is what your heater or your thyroid actually makes, and then it is converted to T3, and T3 is what actually goes and binds to your cells. Specifically, I look at the free levels because hormones, when they're circulating in our body, are either bound to proteins, which makes them inactive, or they're let go of those proteins and then they're free, and they're the ones that go and bind to our cells. So I'm always looking at free T4 and free T3. I can't tell you how many people I've tested with a high TSH that have a normal T4 and T3. And so they're being dangerously and inappropriately treated with thyroid medicine. Or way more common is the people that have all the symptoms of low thyroid. Their TSH is normal or borderline high, but then their T3 is low or their T4 is low. And even a step further is we look at the range. And as a regular doctor, I was kind of taught to get a lab report and just scroll through it and look for what the lab marked as high or low, and then kind of skip the rest, honestly. What I was taught in functional medicine is, where are you falling in that range, right? And so let's say normal is between 1 and 2. And so somebody with a level of 1.1 is being diagnosed as normal, and somebody with a level of 1.9 is normal. That's a pretty different, and the range is bigger on the testing, but we're all different. And so I might feel normal at a level different than what you feel normal at. So full thyroid labs for a proper diagnosis, along with the symptoms. And for people interested in this or have been thinking they have a low thyroid, but have been told they're crazy and to get on an antidepressant, in that chapter on the thyroid, I go through charts of what are normal ranges, but then what is optimal? What's a reference range that you should really be using? And so I think that that's an invaluable resource for people that are struggling and, kind of know that something's wrong. They kind of feel like they know it's their thyroid, but their doctor's saying, no, it's not. Well, you probably haven't had the right testing done yet. And so that resource is there for your listeners that check out the book. And I think it's really helpful. It changed my career. I can't tell you how many patients I would have missed if I was just following what I was taught as a family practice doctor, which is to test your TSH.
And I think your book does a good job too, going back to the why. Like just yesterday, I spoke to a woman who wanted to lose a little weight, was diagnosed with Hashimotos, also diagnosed with an iodine deficiency. And like, that's one of the first things that you talk about in the thyroid chapter is an iodine deficiency can create low thyroid or Hashimotos. So I think that looking at those micronutrient deficiencies is a commonly overlooked thing that your book does a really good job explaining. So if someone has Hashimoto's, I highly recommend that you get this book because there's probably pieces that your traditional doctor is missing. And I think I'm always a fan of advocating for your own health. And I know that we're almost out of time. I have 2 more questions. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. I just wanted to follow up before we touch on the adrenals briefly. Did you say that your mental, emotional, spiritual health is the number one thing that prevents T4, the inactive form of thyroid hormone, to be converted into T3?
Even more so than toxins.
Can you please speak? Like we could have a whole nother episode on that. Can you talk on that?
Yeah, this is actually my passion. And so if anybody has read my first book, Unfunc Your Gut, I'm a perfectionist. That's one of my flaws and gifts, I guess. But I always thought I never focused on my patients who got better. I always focused on my patients that didn't get better and why. And it started with the gut. But the piece that I realized was the most important piece is the mental, emotional, spiritual part. And it's kind of funny that in functional medicine, we have this thing called the matrix that teaches practitioners how to practice functional medicine. And it's all this stuff we've talked about, toxins and mitochondria and cardiovascular health and diet. At the center of this matrix is mental, emotional, spiritual health. And even the majority of functional medicine doctors or practitioners miss it because they haven't dealt with it themselves. Right. Whereas for me, I dealt with alcoholism. I deal with it every day. I deal with my mental, emotional, spiritual health every day. And I saw how it changed my life. So I focused it on it from the beginning. But many doctors don't. For me, example, I've referred every patient I've ever met to a mental health therapist to work with them while they're working with me. This is the number one thing that my patients don't want to work on is, this is usually where they're telling me, well, just find the right supplements, find the right diet, and I'll be fine. And it doesn't work like that. So your adrenal glands, they call them like your stress glands. And so when you're under your body, your nervous system can either be in a sympathetic response or a parasympathetic response. Sympathetic is fight or flight. Since I spent most of the last few years in Montana, the analogy I always used is you're hiking in the mountains and you see a grizzly bear. Sympathetic nervous system should be activated. The blood and energy go to your brain and your muscles to survive. They're shunted away from your liver because you don't want to be detoxing while you're running from a bear. They're shunted away from your gut because digesting your breakfast would be a very bad use of energy if you're trying to get away. And if you do survive and you're sitting by the campfire having s'mores, then you're in rest and digest, parasympathetic. And so our adrenal glands produce a hormone called cortisol when we're under that sympathetic response. Cortisol is one of our fight or flight hormones. Cortisol basically causes 2 things to happen. It causes your immune system to be suppressed and it causes sugar to be released, which is a very bad environment if you're trying to work on insulin resistance or if you're trying to detox or if you're trying to get your gut right or your brain healthy, et cetera. So we can test your cortisol, and the second full chapter of the book after the thyroid chapter is the adrenal gland chapter. So people can dive into this if they want. I really love adrenal gland testing, which is saliva testing to look at your cortisol throughout the day. I call it my stress test. When you think of a stress test, it's like a cardiologist that tests your heart. I test how is your mental, emotional, spiritual health, so we can look at it objectively. And something super interesting I've seen over the years is the more convinced someone is that their mental, emotional, spiritual health is not an issue, the worse their cortisol testing looks. The more that someone tells me they are stressed out, they're dealing with this, this happened when they were kids, the more normal their cortisol curve looks. And there's basically two hormones you don't want elevated in your body, and they are insulin and cortisol. And so the best way to lower your cortisol is to dig in, to deal with the stuff that started with childhood. My favorite definition of trauma, most people think of trauma as violence and things like that. A definition of trauma that I learned during therapy is trauma is anything less than nurturing. So it could be as simple as coming home from school and your parents aren't paying attention to you. And that starts shutting down your gut. Your gut gets leaky. Toxins can start getting in through your gut. And now you've got a leaky gut, you've got dysbiosis, you've got toxins coming in. And then all of a sudden in your 20s, you're diagnosed with Hashimotos or lupus or whatever. And it all started because of the cortisol, the sympathetic nervous system, and not addressing that. That's not everybody, but I see that story over and over.
Yeah. Do you have just a few more minutes for me to tell a quick story to wrap it up?
Sure.
Okay. And I know that I feel like we've kind of gone on the tip of the iceberg, especially with the connection between the toxins and the hormones. I'm really excited to read your book. I was telling Dr. Kozlowski, I only got it 2 days ago, so I haven't read it all yet. And I know I'm going to learn a lot, but we're recording this in December. And just this week in office hours, I was coaching a member who I'm so proud of. She knows who she is, and she has worked on her mental health for the last year. So she joined Zivly, and she was like, I'm so overwhelmed. Like, I don't know what to do with my physical health. I'm trying to focus on my mental health. I'm like, girl, if you're focusing on your mental health, you are focusing on your physical health, because your head and your body are connected. And so a whole year later after therapy, and she's really, like you said, she's dug in and she's dealt with her stress response, and she's done the therapy and the journaling. And I'm so proud of her. And now she's like coming back, and like she was here the whole time, but now she's just like ready. She said, I finally have the mental and emotional space to focus on some of the nutrition changes that I know have needed to happen. And so we were talking about gut health, and I kind of gave her the lowdown of what she can test and who she can see. And I said, but let's talk about the thoughts that are causing you to eat the sugar and the dairy that cause the inflammation in your gut. And they boiled down after about 45 minutes. We got to the root of it. And it was, I'm bored, I'm tired, and I'm in pain. And this is just a really good reminder that you are what you say you are after you say I am. And so she was telling her system, you're bored, you're tired, you're in pain. And those types of thoughts increase cortisol, which then starts the inflammation and the stress response and this whole cascade. And so really simple tip for anyone who's like, well, how do I work on my mental, emotional, spiritual health? Just watch your I am statements, and they can work for you or they can work against you. So one that another member came up with that she could say instead is, I'm in pain and I'm working on reducing my pain. Nice. So really simple thought changes like that can do wonders for reducing your inflammation and cortisol. I just want to reiterate that one more time, that Dr. Koz said that your mental, emotional, and spiritual health are probably bigger factors than toxins for your hormone health. So please do not ignore that part of the conversation. Dr. Koz, was there anything else that you wanted to share with our audience today?
One thing that you sparked is for people that are trying, right? That are like, hey, I'm in therapy, I'm doing yoga, I'm talking to people, but I'm still struggling. Check out the estrogen chapter, the female hormone chapter in the book. The most common condition I find in women is estrogen dominance, and we can have a whole podcast on that. But sometimes when I've seen, and for men like me, low testosterone, like you're just not going to feel right. And so a huge topic that is, I definitely dive deep into, but what I've seen in balancing the estrogen and progesterone in women, when you're estrogen dominant, in which I explain, and all the lab testing and all of it, none of that stuff that you're doing is going to work as well. So also, if someone's struggling, get tested for your hormones, because sometimes your hormones can really be getting in the way of some of the other tools that you're trying.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's definitely a two-way street.
Yeah.
So your book is called Get the Func, F-U-N-C out. And where can people connect with you?
My website, doc-koz.com, doc-koz.com. I'm on Instagram and Facebook, doc_Koz. And Facebook is just Peter Kozlowski, MD. I'm pretty lame, as someone said the other day, on social media. I don't do a ton, but I do, when I do media or events or stuff, I always let people know. And then my books are on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Your local bookstore won't have them in stock, but they probably not, but they will order them if you want that. Support local businesses.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Koz. I know I've learned a lot. I think our listeners will love this episode. Thank you for your time. I know you've been very generous today with your time, and I appreciate it.
My pleasure.